If you have a lot of credit card debt and at the end of the month you have nothing left over to pay down that principal, you may think, how am I ever going to get out of this debt? Well, today I'm excited to tell you about a strategy that can help you do that. And here's the really cool thing about this idea. You don't need any more income and you don't need to cut back on your expenses. I know, it sounds like magic. Well, I'm going to walk you through exactly how it works and I'm going to explain why it works. Let's talk about Jake. Jake has $10,000 in credit card debt. But Jake only has a take-home pay of $4,000. Now, you may think, how is Jake ever going to pay off $10,000 when all of his expenses are already taking up all of his $4,000 in take-home pay? Well, the first thing Jake needed to do was he needs to split his expenses into two different categories. And I know what you're thinking. I'm not going to tell you that Jake had to decrease some of those expenses. What he actually needed to do was divide his expenses into the expenses that he can use a credit card to pay off and the expenses that he cannot use a credit card to pay off. For instance, rent payments you can't use a credit card for. Maybe insurance or a car payment. Whatever the payments are that you absolutely can't put on your credit card, you need to separate that out. And in this case, half of Jake's income is going to expenses that he can't use a credit card to pay off. And so all of a sudden he has $2,000 there. The other $2,000 is stuff like grocery and gas and everything else that he can actually use a credit card to pay off. This number is going to be key to the whole thing. So let's first talk about this $10,000 debt. His minimum monthly payment is going to be $383. A minimum payment actually has two components to it. And the first is interest and the other is principal. And in terms of interest, $183 of that $383 expense is just paying for the interest on this $10,000 debt. That means the principal payment is $200. That's going to be an important component. So let's talk about this. Let me put it in visual terms. Let's say here's their $10,000 debt. At the beginning of the month, he's going to save off the amount that he cannot use a credit card to spend, to pay off, and he's going to take all of that expense and he's going to use it to pay down his credit card immediately. Okay? So he's going to pay $2,000 to his credit card, and that means the balance at the beginning of the month for this credit card is $81.83. So why isn't it just $2,000? We talked about him, paying $2,000 off. Well, remember, $183 of that isn't going towards principal, it's going to the interest expense. So this is his balance at this point. Now, at this point, he's thinking, okay, I've got no money in the bank. How am I going to go to the grocery store? How am I going to get gas? Well, that's what you use your credit card for. And so over the course of the month, you spend exactly what you normally would, but you use that credit card. And that means that his expense is going to go back up to $1,617. That's how much his expense is minus the payment to the credit card, which we've already paid, right? So we don't have to count that as an expense twice. His new balance statement is $9,800. So already he's dropped $200. But here's the thing. He's not going to be charged interest on the $9,800. He, of course, charged a daily rate based on the balance outstanding, not necessarily what's at the end of the month, but throughout the month. The fact that he lowered that overall principal amount at the beginning of the month meant that he was being charged a little bit less interest along the way. So we're going to take the $2,000 again for this month. We're going to pay that down. And now the beginning balance at this point is $79.53. And just like the last month, he's going to use the credit card to pay for all of his living, which is once again $1,617. right? It's the same amount he was before. We have not decreased it at all. And that means at the end of this month, his overall balance is now $95.70. Think about that. He's now gone down another $230. The coolest thing about this is as this goes on, we could continue doing this out. And as we see, it's going to accelerate the payoff. 200, 230, 260, 270, it's going to go up the amount he's going to pay off. And so all of a sudden you're starting to see, hey, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. This feels like a slow start, but I promise you, if you do this in 28 months, you're not even paying interest anymore. And then you just have a little bit of debt left to pay off, and you can be done in less than 3 years. But now that you know how it works, let me give you another secret. If you implement this idea and you decide, I want to be aggressive, I do want to cut back on my spending. You can't do it forever. It's really hard to cut back on our spending forever. But what if you make a game of it in the first month or 2 months? Well, every $10 that you save in the first month will yield almost $6 of savings over the life of the loan. Think about that. Where else are you going to get a 50 to 60% increase on your money in 2 years' time? And that means if you are really aggressive and you decide, okay, we're going to make a game of this, we're going to see how little money we can spend in the first month. That will absolutely accelerate your debt payoff. But here's the other cool thing about this strategy. Usually when you decide you're going to save money, you need to pay off your debt, you don't go to the restaurant one night, you do other things, you eat in a little bit more often, and at the end of the month, maybe you have more money, maybe you don't. But what happens if you saved a little bit of money and at the end of the month you had $25, $30, or even $50 in your account? Most of us are kind of lazy and we don't actually make the principal payment and take that $50 and pay it to our credit card. We think, oh, that is a buffer for next month. Every time you save money with your credit card, because all of your expenses are going through that credit card, whenever you don't swipe your credit card, it immediately impacts that principal amount. And you don't need to do anything more. It's immediately saving you money. And that's the coolest thing about it, is your efforts become immediate. So what I want you to think about is splitting up your expenses into things you can use a credit card to pay and things that you can't use a credit card to pay. Do everything you can in your credit card. At that point, pay it off early. Save the interest expense during the month. And then accelerate that. Keep paying and maximize how much you pay. Here's the one caution I would give you. If you are one of those people that struggle to control your spending when you're using a credit card, this strategy may not work for you. Why? Because you may not be able to keep your expenses to the 16, 17 that Jake was able to do. And if you end up overspending, then you're just maxing out your credit card every month and you're not actually making progress. If you enjoyed this video and you found it useful, please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching.